Rebel Devs Podcast, a show that challenges conventional thinking in the tech industry. Each episode features conversations with solutionists who have taken unconventional approaches to problem solving, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in their respective fields. Join the devolution.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Rebel Devs Podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Tom May. I'm here with my partner in crime, Jonah. Jonah, how you doing today?
Howdy, everyone. I am doing pretty well. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, but I am adapting and overcoming.
Yeah, that's the best you can hope for sometimes. And we have a special guest here, Geoff Burke. Geoff, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. It's a Friday, so I'd say significantly better than a Monday.
Oh, that's true. It is Friday. Look at that. I didn't even think about that. So that's pretty cool. Well, everybody knows who Jonah and I are, and we're the infamous ones here on the podcast. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because we invited you here for a reason. Beyond you're a smart guy, but tell us why you're smart.
Well, I'm glad you said that. It's really my school career. There was differing opinions. But so who am I? I am community leader or community manager at ObjectFirst. Before that, I was basically system administrator, backup administrator for service providers with Veeam, Cloud Connect, and other software. But now, as I said, I'm community leader, which is a totally different job, but it combines having to know technology with also creating communities, which is just a lot of fun. I've kind of hit the dream job at last.
That's awesome. By all means. Yeah. I know that I've seen you kicking around the ecosystem for a long time, different hats for sure. And, finally got to meet when I became a Vanguard. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you here today, I mean, I'm glad that you said Object First. So we love to pay the bills. So we say Veeam a whole lot. So it hashtags out real nice. You said Object First. So before we jump into the Kubernetes, which is what I'm excited to know a little bit more about, why don't you just give us a high level view of Object First? We had Anthony Cusimano on a couple episodes ago when we were talking about resilient storage, but you being the Veeam Vanguard, I'm curious, he gave me the whole 10 minutes and it's implemented and muted, but break it down for me a little bit more, Geoff, because you definitely have, I think, some more Veeam experience.
Yeah. So what's interesting is object storage really fits well for backup repositories. So that's just become kind of everyone. Well, I'd say most people understand that now. And Veeam can use different types of object storage, and they're all pluses and minuses here. The beauty of object storage, and this is not a sales, I'm not a salesperson, by the way, so they don't let me near the sales because I don't always say what sales want me to say. But what I will say is that ObjectFirst was built specifically for Veeam. And that's important because anyone who knows Veeam knows that Veeam deals with its backup jobs, its backup repositories in a specific way. And so if you have an S3 object storage, which is built for everything, so for people's files, for their videos, for, whatever, it's not going to work as well dealing with backup and with Veeam specifically because Veeam leverages this a little bit differently. And that became even more of I wouldn't say an issue, but an important element when Veeam introduced the SOS API. The SOS API is just an addition to the S3 protocol, and it allows Veeam backups and Veeam to do a couple of things that are really important. So one is you can know what capacity you have in your object storage. When I first built a capacity tier for Veeam, one of the problems was I couldn't tell how much was in there. And the accounting department said, Geoff, what are we going to charge the customer? So I don't know. I don't know how much is in there. So SOS API does that. More importantly, though, it can allow you to load balance better and also do all sorts of Veeam related, let's say, performance enhancements with the backup. So I won't go too deep because I'll put people to sleep, but that's what's important. So ObjectFirst built specifically for Veeam and only for Veeam. That's, I guess, in a nutshell.
I love that because that same conversation you've had, I've had countless times when I work for a service provider. How much are we consuming? What are we charging the customer? And it's always this weird, let me figure out a block calculator to figure out. And after a while, you're just like, I don't know, I'm just making it up. And then the customer's like, what do you mean you're making it up? And you're like, ah. So I love it from that standpoint. But what I love about the concept is I predated ObjectFirst, like I'm sure you did, and said, I'll build a Ceph cluster. And you are in the seventh layer of hell if you do that. I mean, there is not a worse place to be. And I know you're a Linux guy, I believe, because I know I am to a degree, but it harkened me back to the days of like really old kernels where you were like, my first project was Myth TV. Okay.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
I loved it, right? It was great. I didn't want to pay for cable. I was one of the first cable cutters, or cord cutters, but I'd get in there and I'd be like, I have a video card. And it'd be like, well, you have to compile the drivers. And you're like, what? And you're poking.
Dependency hell.
Yeah. Exactly. So when I started in Ceph, it was like, okay, we're going to run it on this Dell R whatever. And they're like, oh, do you have a perk whatever card? Oh, well, we're seeing that it's dropping and rebalancing the cluster. So let's go ahead. And every other day you're like, why is the cluster rebalancing? And why is that node offline? And so I came to a year-long journey that equated to, I want to pay somebody else for their hardware. And I was like, forget it. And even still, the vendors we were choosing were struggling still. So when I first was introduced to S3 and what birthed it was really overcoming taping challenges at a cloud provider. And that was when Ratmare was still at Veeam. And I remember they kind of, I think it was Miami or somewhere. They were like, hey, we have this idea about S3 storage. Do you know what this is? And we're like, wait, it'll replace tape and it's resilient and whatnot. And we're like, wow. And so we started getting into it. So it just really didn't work. And you're right in that capacity tier. And then, wow, ObjectFirst comes around and I'm watching it. And it's kind of like interesting in the beginning, I think, because to me, it was kind of like the silent thing. It's like Ratmare's grown the company. They're doing some R&D. You hear some stuff. They're going to be doing storage. What's coming out? Wait, there's a product. There's kind of not. Wait, there's something like, you're like, what is it? It's this mystery. And then boom, the unveiling. And I kept telling my customers, I was like, you need to watch for ObjectFirst because while they're not there right now, when they launch, they're going to hit it hard. And then one day all the tumblers fall into place and you're going to wish that you had been there. And we actually at Different Dev just became a partner with ObjectFirst. And we were out at a show explaining to people. And I don't know if you're able to make this in July, but I know that we had Tracy from ObjectFirst and she's excited. Jonah and I lead the Texas VUG for Veeam.
Yep.
And what we're going to do is I'm going to bring in one of our Linux guys who's going to talk about Linux hardened repository, but we're going to bring in ObjectFirst. So you guys, you're going to be a sponsor. So you get that 15 minutes of, okay, we're trapped for your sales pitch, but in 15 minutes, you can show us how to configure it and go. But more importantly, we're going to have this real candid conversation that is why ObjectFirst is better than Linux hardened, because a lot of people come to us and say, I want Linux hardened. And as a service partner, we're like, hey, we can build it. We can configure it. Pay us some pro services. But I'm like, how are you patching it? How are you monitoring it? How are you doing this? And all these things. And they're just blankly staring at us. And I'm like,
exactly.
Again, you just want a local box that's going to work and be safe, secure, and easily configured. So I'm excited for that conversation and more customers, their ears are starting to perk up on that. So definitely awesome in those regards.
And you hit the nail on the head too, because I had a conversation last week with some folks up here in Canada. And I was saying that 5 years ago, and I've been doing Linux since 1998, I would have taken on the responsibility to build a hardened repository, or any kind of solution like that. The problem isn't me and the problem isn't companies. The problem is the ransomware expansion. It's hitting massively. And if someone came to me today and said, Geoff, with all the knowledge you have, all the experience you have, will you please build this Linux hardened repository? And it's a wonderful solution. I would say no for two reasons. One, time. I know working as a back administrator, I had barely enough time to keep everything going. To focus on security 24/7, to be ready to respond 24/7, I don't have time for that. And two, do I really want the responsibility? Because the game now is really big stakes. We're talking huge amounts of money. We're talking businesses disappearing. I don't have the time and I don't want the responsibility. If someone comes in with ObjectFirst, let's say, says, okay, we're going to put this in there. Don't worry about it. Hook it up. It's their problem. That's good. And they have a team. Now, to be fair, play devil's advocate. If you have a huge organization, huge enterprise, you have a whole security team, you have like 10 Linux experts, you're not relying on one who might leave or, do whatever. Then, yeah, I can't see it being worse, the Linux hardened repository. It's an excellent piece of technology. The question is the day two, do you have the time? Do you have the expertise? And do you want to take the responsibility?
Well, in the States, I don't think there's a lot of Linux-driven people. Every time we come in, I do not consider myself a Linux guru, but I've been kicking around like you from, mid to the late 90s. So I've been there. So I guess that gives me a leg up on a lot of folks. And I don't use it as often as I used to. But the moment I start talking Linux, people are just like, oh, what do we do with this? Like, I don't know that we want this in our environment. And God's honest truth, the biggest challenge we had when I had a lot of Linux boxes, because we used to run Assay farms and whatnot, and it was all Linux driven, was patching. That was the biggest thing. Like, oh, great. Back in the day, you could use sus, mom, whatever you want, third party. And then you'd be like, cool, what do you do for Linux? And they'd be like, what? Yeah, we don't patch it,
Scripts.
And exactly. They're like, yeah, that's not a thing. And I'm like, no. I need some dashboard. I need some compliance reporting. Give me some dials, like make people feel happy that I have some security matrix. And I'd have to play with like spacewalk and things. And it was not feasible. Today, there are more tools like the Linux boxes we have in our environment. Yeah, they're monitored, they're patched, like it's a thing, but still it takes that skill set. And so really, as I look to the Veeam Linux Hardened Repository, when we had this last VUG meeting, I just brought up the concept. I was like, cool. So you're going to Linux harden it. That's awesome. When's the last time the community script was updated? Like, was this a project that someone delivered? Are they keeping pace on it? Is somebody going back and saying, these are the latest vulnerability matrices, do these things also? Are there refresh scripts? But now if you've hardened it down so hard, how are you doing patches? Are you unhardening it? Are you coming back? Well, if you can unharden it, they can unharden it. You've negated it. And then some folks are even like, well, we run them virtually. And I'm like, well, good God, man. Now you can come in through the just VMware or
hypervisor.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, wow. I'm like, yes, but again, and people's budget paths, I'll say a lot of people come into the Linux Hardened Repository, even if they're virtual, then they may move to some older hardware and go physical. And then, if we roadmap them into ObjectFirst, but it's a conversation we're having more and more. We're just like, in my world, I always equate it to, I'd say that guy. Nobody wants to be that guy. Like the last thing you want is to be in a major cyber incident like you're talking about and somebody go, oh man, I'm so sorry. Had I just told you about this little box, you wouldn't be having this problem. And people look at you and they're just like, what is wrong with you? We would have chosen that path. I'd rather have them make a choice that might not be the best for themselves, but so that way when it goes sideways, you're like, listen, I'm not rubbing dirt in your wound, but hey man, like remember when we talked about this? We're in the scenario. You chose this risk at this point.
Exactly.
And, I'm excited because you guys are answering the scalability, the cluster sizes, all these things forthcoming, which is wonderful. And the fact that easy integration, which is huge because Veeam, we love it. But I was talking to some guy the other day and he was just like, oh, well, all these proxies and this jams and that jams and whatever. And you're like, well, it's complex in nature because there's a lot of moving parts and that would bring it reliability and whatnot. And for some reason in the backup world, we say if it's complex, it must be bad. But any other system, talk to somebody about their SAN and their hypervisor and there's 12 layers and they're all excited about how awesome it is. And you talk about Veeam and they're just like, good God, what's wrong? So
exactly, yeah.
I don't know. But, I want to shift into Kubernetes if you don't mind, because I really just went to the Vanguard Summit last year, or the V100 Summit, and Michael Cade gave the quick primer on it. And I was like, okay, Kubernetes, it sounds cool. Is it like Docker? Is it containerization? I can say the buzzy words. And I went through and I went like point, shoot, click, point, shoot, click. And Cade was just such a genius with it. I was like, dude, like fill in some blanks. So I don't know if the listeners, even other than hearing the word Kubernetes or maybe even a cast in, no. So what's going on here? Like teach me, Obi-Wan.
So basically what you have to think about, it's actually like everything. I like to use the mosaic example. So if you look at one of those ancient Greek mosaics, if you look at it from afar, it's like, oh my God, so complicated. You have to get close and look at the individual pieces, which are quite simple. And this is similar in that sense. So historically, containers have been around for a long time. It's nothing new. And the secret was that a lot of big organizations were actively using these. They had their different systems, whatnot. One of the challenges, though, and you can relate to this if you've dealt with VMs, is that when you had physical servers, you had the 10 physical servers. Fine. You go in there, you do your patch reboots. Then you had VMs. You needed something to control them. You couldn't just have VMs out on their own. You had to have something that was going to be on top of them to help you do all sorts of tasks. containers have been around for a long time. From the get-go, because they're smaller, you can have a lot more of them. You need something to orchestrate them. The word orchestrator comes to play. And so there were different versions of it. Google had its Borg, or Bjorg. It still has it, but they had a big discussion back and forth and decided to open source part of it, rename it Kubernetes. And what Kubernetes basically does is takes those same containers. They can be Docker. I mean, Docker is just Docker made things much more available to the masses because it simplified things to write little pieces of code, to create containers and whatnot. But the problem is that you have this orchestration. What is orchestration? It's like having a billion little VMs. You want to do updates. You want to have it self-heal, things like that. You need the orchestrator, and that's what Kubernetes is. And it goes back to something which is from the developer world. And again, DevOps is what? It's a combination of developers and operation folks. It's declarative. In other words, I write down on a piece of paper, I want the world to look like this. And then that piece of paper code, be it YAML or JSON, goes out and watches the world. So if you have VMs, well, not VMs, but let's say containers working, doing something, little websites that are containers, for instance, one goes down, the YAML, the code or the API says, whoa, we're down. Restart the container. Oh, do this. So things keep running. You can do updates massively. You can do updates whereby you don't have to have downtime because you can bring containers down and bring other ones up at the same time. So it simplifies orchestrating it. Now, if it gets to the point of why it's so attractive. So think about it. One of the problems with VMs and with physical servers was you would get these huge physical servers or even create big VMs, and it's using maybe only a portion of the resources. But you need those just in case. Because let's say you have a web farm or something, and today you've got so much traffic, but then let's say on weekends that traffic goes way up. So if you're in VMs or in physical machines, VMs you can orchestrate a bit better, you have to have that capacity always ready. When it comes to containers, that's much easier to do because what you can say is you can put rules in saying, oh, if traffic goes to 80%, boom, throw in 10 more containers, boom, expand. Traffic goes down, get rid of them. I'd say the best example of this is Pokemon Go. And I've never played it. I never played it. But you know that was a game where people walking around with their cell phones running the garbage cans and stuff? There was a place downtown Toronto, the Ferry Docks, which for some reason, and I didn't play this game, so I don't know why, all these Pokemon things would be down there. And so 9 a.m., all these people would show up there to do their Pokemon thing. And that system, and that was similar in other cities, never went down. It never failed despite these massive changes. And it was because it was running on Kubernetes. Now, last thing I'll say from the fun department, okay, because that's all kind of, big time enterprise. When I first started playing Kubernetes, the nerd, the geek came back in me, the person playing Doom in the 90s, added RAM because my monsters were too slow. That came back because I could suddenly do so much with so little. So VMs, you had that feeling as well. But with VMs, you need a certain amount of power. You might need even a good big server or whatever. On my laptop with Kubernetes, I can emulate huge organizations. They're going to be a lot smaller in scale, but the same process, same things. So when it comes to learning, when it comes to playing and just doing whatever you want, it's fabulous. So that's a kind of long, but I'm trying to simplify why I like it so much and its benefits.
That's awesome because I've had probably 2 calls for Kubernetes. So it's starting to bubble up and, being Veeam professional services, it's like, hey, can you back this up? And I'm like, yeah, of course we could. I'm not your guy. Like, that's the first conversation. I'm just like, yeah. Not your guy. Like, could I do it? Yeah, which means I shouldn't do it because of that statement. But it always comes down to this interesting concept of, yeah, but we need someone to look at it for optimization or looking at it because even those out there playing with it don't really kind of wrap their head around it. So I kind of wonder, so a lot of times in AWS, when I'm dealing with those customers, I try to pivot them into like a VMware on AWS. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I'm like, listen, I don't like the appliance world. And I know in the Veeam world, we have these appliances and we inject them and it's just easy. Every time I find it's just easy, I'm sacrificing something. So I'd rather build the more complex infrastructure and run easy things on it, knowing, hey, I could just flip a switch and it will add this feature rather than arbitrarily hitting this wall of saying, well, we'll never do that. Well, yeah, you say that till you go to do that, of course. So is Kubernetes something like I could do in the Amazon world or in Azure and I can run this, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there are different distributions. And the way to kind of think about this is like with Linux, with different Linux distributions. So you got the Linux kernel. But then you have Red Hat, you've got, Ubuntu, whatnot. That's kind of similar. So you have things like Tanzu, which is VMware Kubernetes. You have OpenShift, which is Red Hat's. K3S, Ranchers, which now I think is owned by SUSE, I believe. And it is that way. The difference is this, is that depending on what you want to do, and what I think the problem is, what you've talked about, is it hasn't filtered into the mid-level yet as much. At the top levels, it's being used quite a bit. Government, big enterprises. There was a story that came up on Aviation Week, which I read, about the U.S. Air Force used Kubernetes in the U-2 spy plane to do an update in flight. Okay, and they were able to do that. So I use that as an example of the power of the system and the trust of the system. You're flying, and this is your, and they did that. You can Google that and find that. But, and if you take situations like always on, banks, financial organizations, I think we talked about this at 1.4 or someone recently about all the AS400 and I-series programs. A lot of them starting to be ported to Kubernetes. But again, it's going to take a while to filter down, and there's also the learning curve. And so to talk about the learning curve, to make certain that people are aware, I know some people who are even much better at Linux than me. And you would think that a Linux person, this would be just easy, but it's not. It is a different thing. Yes, if you have Linux skills, you're going to be further ahead, obviously, because command line, whatnot, but it is a different ball game. You have to go in there very humbly because they're different concepts. On the other hand, though, once you start to learn, it's so much fun, you just start doing it for fun. So it's not learning anymore.
Yeah, no. And being a Linux guy, I'm always like, I'm scared. Okay. I'm not scared of Kubernetes.
Yeah.
I'm scared of the addiction. Like you said, once it's fun, it's been 4 days. I haven't showered, like forget brushing the teeth. You're like, don't be on video. It's the same t-shirt again. Like what's going on? Because it does seem to really be that way. And talking to Jonah, I was like, listen, man, I'm a dinosaur. And you say AS400 and whatnot. I remember those days. I remember OS2. I remember all that good stuff. And it's the way of the dinosaurs. But I'm like, think of my career looking at maybe 20 years in here. I'm like, there's going to be more mainstream Kubernetes, I think. And maybe I can skate through and just be that last of a dying breed. Like I dream of the day that someone calls and they're like, we need a Windows NT or 2000 guy because there's this old system. Because my mentor back in the day, he was like, today you're learning technology that is cutting edge. One day it's going to be obsolete. And then another day, you're going to be a hot commodity because someone will have something somewhere.
Exactly.
And you'll actually be that guy. So I'm like, maybe I'll trade out on my NT4 days. But as we talked with Jonah, I was like, dude, I think you got to be all in this because this is going to be at the forefront. What do you think about it, Jonah? I mean, you've been kicking around VMware and Hyper-V were a thing. So you've been hypervised. What's your take on this whole Kubernetes world?
I think it's very powerful, but I think at least the times I've tried to use it, it's still a little complicated to set up and there are barriers to entry. Though my experiences are specifically with VMware Tanzu and attempting to run it on top of VMware hosts. But it wanted NSX, it was doing all sorts of weird things like, mind you, some of it was in my home lab, so it was unsupported hardware, but NSX and VMware would work fine on those hosts. But the moment I installed Tanzu packages, I'd have to factory reset some of the hosts because they would just refuse to come back up after the reboot. And the weird thing was too, is it was 2 or 3 hosts with identical hardware, and some of the hosts the packages worked on, some of the hosts they didn't work on.
Yeah, and point out one thing about that. Tanzu is a very specific beast because they've underneath the hood, it's Kubernetes, kubeadm basically, but they've added a lot of things in. They almost tried to really, they did merge it with vSphere things. So it's not a typical example in the sense that a real Kubernetes, I won't say real, but the vanilla Kubernetes is separate. And maybe OpenShift is a better example because there the virtualization has now gone inside. So they're using libvirt, or you're running virtual machines inside Kubernetes. But the times I played with Tanzu, you've got things like NSX. Well, real Kubernetes doesn't even know what NSX is. Like it's a totally different concept. I think it's a challenge trying to merge. They're trying to keep their existing technology and merge it with Kubernetes so that you can help people at the same time who are still with VMs and also with the new.
So go back there to something that you're saying, because this just popped into my brain. And I know we'll have a conversation here that everybody's having everywhere, which is Broadcom and VMware and whatnot. So you just referenced Kubernetes running virtual machines. So I get that there's virtual machines, containerizations and layering and whatnot. But what you just said to me was, it sounded like that was a more traditional VM kind of scenario? Is that what you're describing? So,
Yep. So what it is basically there's something called libvirt. I believe Tanzu can do it too, because I did a bunch of Tanzu courses. The idea is, let's say you've got a Kubernetes cluster, but you need to run a few VMs or a bunch of VMs, but you want to run them the same way declaratively. So that same YAML file that you create to containerization, you can create VMs in that YAML file, and it'll run a VM. And keep in mind, the difference between a VM and, let's say, a container is basically when a container is built. Let's say I've got Geoff's application. So in the old days, I take Geoff's application and I would put it into a VM. So one of the problems with that was that Geoff's application is running an OS. Okay, but what if this then has to run on the servers, which are running a different OS or a different version of OS, or with different libraries? Remember dependency hell, right? So what containers solve was, no, what we're going to do, we're going to take the application and put it in this little bubble and then stick it in this thing, which is the same everywhere. So let's say I've got Geoff's application, but it's a container now. And it's in Docker, for instance. Good example, Docker, which can, Kubernetes on top of it, and say, okay, it doesn't matter what the operating system is. As long as it's Docker, it's going to run because all it knows is the container, the thing that's wrapped around it. The other beauty of it is if you're a developer, you used to have like 10 virtual machines to test different versions. Now create 10 different containers with different libraries, different versions of libraries, all in your little area because they're not conflicting. So the idea of the VMs and libvirt is the same thing, that you can actually run these from Kubernetes. So you write a YAML file, say, I want an Ubuntu. And it'll go and it'll grab the Ubuntu, like a template, let's say, in VMware or whatever, and put it there and run it with specific settings. I'm not an expert in libvirt yet. I know there's a couple other Vanguards have been playing with it. But that's the idea, is it's more declarative and it can run within the orchestrator. So the orchestrator is also running that. And the orchestrator has these things called operators, and that's what they are. They're watching all the time. And they're in loops. If they see something that stops working, then they intervene. So those same concepts would just be applied to a virtual machine.
So following that logic, it almost sounds like this is kind of the trajectory of somebody new to Kubernetes, where we're like, I don't know about this. My brain doesn't get this containerization. Like high level, I do, but like it's just a different way of thinking. And it almost sounds like, I could spin out Kubernetes and still run my traditional VMware workloads. Kind of like when I worked for Apple, right? The whole concept of the iPhone and iTunes was you were getting a taste of Apple software, so we could lure you into the iPhone and you were excited and you used iTunes. And then it was like, wow, I really like this device. I kind of like this software. Geez, it kind of goes next level with my Mac. All right, I'll take this step into Mac. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, I'm this Apple guy, right? Like I'm in this ecosystem and I don't ever go back and go run an iPhone on Windows. You're insane. And I've probably dated myself because I don't know anybody that actually still hooks their phone to their computer. But, kids back in the day, we actually did that and synced things onto our phone. So, and that was Apple's strategy at the time when we were there. It was kind of like hook them and draw them over. And I became a card carrying Apple guy because of all of that. So it sounds like that's an easy entry point, but do you think that Kubernetes could realistically become the VMware solution if Broadcom keeps in this track? And even myself, I tell people we bought licensing internally like a month before the Broadcom announcement. So when they announced it, we're like, yeah, we just made it under there. We got 3 years. Maybe Broadcom will screw the world for a year and a half and go, biggest mistake ever. Let's revert back. We want customers and I'll be okay. Until I realized, oh gosh, we need some more horsepower. Let's add something to the data center. It's like, oh, well, they don't sell your licensing anymore. So, you got to upgrade to the $25,000 level. And you're just like, you've lost your mind. What's going on? Do you think Kubernetes enters that conversation as the possible?
So first of all, I don't think it happened as a kind of lure. That's for certain. I think it was more from a situation where eventually they foresee there's going to be more and more containers. And eventually, but just like with physical servers, we still have them. There's always going to be roles for VMs. And so I think the question is not so much us versus hypervisors, because hypervisors can still run with Kubernetes inside them. So you can have your VMware and not use Tanzu. I had VMware and I used a Kubernetes cluster inside of Kubernetes, inside of VMware. You just create the VMs, Linux VMs. You can use immutable VMs too, like a system like Talos inside of VMware. The difference is that they won't know any of the VMware stuff, but I've run clusters in them. So I think it was more a case of people realizing that at some point will be organizations which will have many more, they'll be orchestrating a lot more containers than they're orchestrating VMs, but they still need VMs. And so this will help them in the sense that they can use the same tooling. I think that's the important thing, to run these VMs. And it'll be interesting to see which direction Tanzu goes. I know that from what I've heard, Broadcom's very interested in Tanzu, so they have no desire to get rid of it or anything like that. But how it evolves will be interesting, because you tend to see, I think at least, that the more open source stuff will push forward faster, I believe, especially in the Kubernetes world, just because it's so powerful. But we'll see. That could be controversial. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. The libvirt, the big organizations doing it right now is basically Red Hat. So OpenShift is really taking that on. And OpenShift and Red Hat and VMware and OpenShift are kind of like a big competitive. So, we'll see. I've been playing recently with Nutanix, by the way, just for fun. And they have a Nutanix container. I haven't looked at it yet, but it's an orchestration for containers in Nutanix. It's their Kubernetes. It's called, I think, Nutanix Kubernetes. So everyone's kind of bringing this on. Keep in mind that a lot of times it's just like the Linux distribution situation. So there's a kernel. Well, there's kubeadm, which is a vanilla Kubernetes. And companies can take that, it's open source, and then they can kind of build their own things on top, like Rancher, which is SUSE has Rancher. So it'll be interesting. Rancher itself also, I believe, does the libvirt as well. So you can, inside of Rancher, which is basically an orchestrator Kubernetes. And the other thing I'll mention about Kubernetes, which is really fun, especially now in the ransomware world, is the immutable OSs. So it's like Talos, which Michael Cade, you mentioned before, he loves it. Talos is, they're immutable OSs for Kubernetes, designed for Kubernetes. So I played with it a bit. I mean, and Jonah's right. There's complication. There's a learning curve. There's no doubt about it. And to tell you the difference between doing the learning curve and not, there is something called Docker Swarm. It's still around. It's not nowhere near as popular as Kubernetes. It's also container orchestration. Docker built this. It's a lot simpler. I was able literally in a week to get a Docker Swarm up, and they're called Docker Swarm. But what I started to find is the things that are simpler to set up tend to be less flexible. And when you're trying to squeeze as many resources as you've got out of a system, or you're trying to do a lot of things and you want them to do a specific way, you need flexibility. So that's where I think that the trade-off is between complexity and having to learn and getting something simple. So a lot comes down to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do something which is relatively simple and you don't need to go Kubernetes route, you could use Docker Swarm, or you could just use Docker containers, like have 5 Docker containers running. But if you want to really leverage this and really get the power of it, do things like virtual machines, then you have to go the learning curve.
Well, I always worry, like I've always been an open source guy forever. And it's always been a hard shift for me to bring it into production of any enterprise, because it's always this, we invest into it. It kind of matures into, wow, this is a really feasible product. And at some point, somebody wants to monetize it on some level. Somebody wants to, like, Oracle, KVM, this is great. Let's have all these cool things, until they realize, wow, there's enough people using this now. Now let's charge for support or patching or whatever else. And, Red Hat, you really, famous doing that years ago. And we all ran away and went to Suntos and whatnot. And we're like, whatever. And we fork out.
And that went under too.
Oh yeah, I know. Oh yeah, it's just like anything I joke, anything I fall in love with, dies a horrible death. And, hopefully HP doesn't put the hitman out on me. But like any storage I've ever bought in my life, I'm like, I love Left Hand, HP buys it. It's like, I love Nimble. I love NetApp. You're just like, come on, HP, stop touching what I like. I think you buy stuff just to kill it, not even to assimilate it. You're just like, we can't beat it. Nimble's awesome. Let's just kind of destroy it some, So that's just my scare. But as I start looking at containerization and stuff, it's an interesting shift. And even with Kubernetes, because I don't think it's myself, like as a dinosaur, bringing it about. I really think it's the guys coming out of school right now, the coders that are coming in, that are learning new coding skills. And it's not just like, oh, I use some sort of app to write my code in and publish it, compile it, whatever. It's actually having it containerized out of the get-go. And then they're coming into the marketplace going, oh, well, I need a Kubernetes, I need a Docker, I need a whatever. And then you look at different security companies that are piling on top of these and aligning, like we see sync with Docker and different things like this going out there. It really is kind of interesting. And then, of course, sprinkling in AI just makes it even crazier when you start working that in there. So, welcome Skynet, this may be an artifact of our civilization at some point.
9000, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there we go. So, we've kind of had everybody on this episode for a little while, and we've paid some bills. We've had some fun. Any closing thoughts? And maybe we'll come back for another episode and talk some fun stuff. So anything, Geoff, Jonah?
Yeah. So I'll just say that the funny thing is it's difficult to make predictions in anything, especially in IT. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to get eventually a kind of merging of technologies as always, and you'll have always different offerings. You'll have complex offerings, you'll have simpler offerings. And at the end of the day, my experience is always, it's never a waste to learn something, even let's say if it becomes dinosaured, because the actual experience of learning will help you and you can just replicate that onto something else. So for people saying, I don't have the time to learn Kubernetes, just learn for the sake of learning, because that effort will help you in other departments. If you want to learn gardening or something. So that's for the people who like me are generally lazy. I don't want to do this. Well, do it anyways for fun.
Jonah? What about you, sir? Any closing thoughts here? You're the young, hip, smart guy.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like Geoff was saying, I'll be interested to see where it goes, or rather both that you were saying. Like, I know internally at my company, we're doing a lot of product engineering work. We've formed a new team. We're rebuilding labs for all sorts of development work and testing. And one thing we've been tasked with is kind of like you were referring to earlier, Geoff, where can we containerize some of the CI/CD pipelines where possible? And obviously, some of it is not going to be containerized because Veeam, for example, is not built to be running containers, at least backup and replication. But from our code base, better for us to spin up a container to run some of those unit tests than have to have dedicated machines or have to build new environments as new tests need to be ran.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty cool. So, well, everybody, I thank you, Geoff, for joining us today. And ObjectFirst. If you're not familiar with them, check them out on the web. If you're interested in buying it, hey, we sell it at Different Dev. You know where to find me or find your favorite partner of choice. Jonah, thank you for popping in here. We'll help you pay some bills. CyberFortress, one of our favorite cloud providers. If you are looking for a Veeam cloud service provider anywhere in the world, they handle that. They can give you many solutions for all of your backup needs. What we love about CyberFortress is just the sheer fact of you don't have to have that hot data center running. You really kind of get a warm solution that's ready to go. But more than anything else, it's not self-service. Call those guys over there and, they'll spin you when they need to spin you. And you get to meet smart people like Jonah, which are on the forefront of all things Veeam. But thank you, gents. And everybody, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Whether you're a seasoned solutionist or just starting out, the Rebel Devs podcast is a must listen. So join us. Comment, share, and subscribe. Be part of the Rebel Devs.